Good morning, everyone. Shockingly, the very first Torah portion, Bereishit, contains a murder. The murder of Abel by his very own brother Cain. Cain kills Hevel. But here's what the verse says. The verse says that one day they were out in the field and Cain said to Abel, and right after that it says, he rose up in the field and murdered his brother Abel. And the question is, what did he say to him? The verse starts out by saying they were in the field and Cain said to Abel. But then it doesn't tell us what he said to him. It just goes on to say, and he rose up and murdered his brother. And the commentaries say that's exactly the point. The point the verse is trying to make is that their conversation, their dialogue broke down. What did he say to his brother? The point is they could no longer communicate with each other. It interrupts the conversation and it goes to the murder to teach us a very important lesson. That as long as we are speaking to one another, as long as we are sharing our thoughts and feelings, then we could hopefully resolve it. But if we stop talking to each other and we just allow the anger and the frustration and the bitterness and the resentment to be pent up, that, God forbid, could ultimately lead to the outlet of violence itself. You know, the Talmud says that there were two great rabbis, Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. They were always arguing and debating things in the Talmud. But the Talmud says that when they debated with one another, when one would state an opinion, before the other one counteracted his opinion with his disagreeing perspective, he would first review what the other one said. And that's a very important insight in how to have conversations. Sometimes we have to have uncomfortable, difficult conversations. And sometimes we have to disagree with each other. But we have to learn how to do it respectfully. And we have to learn how to listen, because part of a conversation is not just speaking, but listening. And being able to validate the other person by saying, let me make sure I understand what you said before I respond with my perspective and my opinion. And if we learn how to converse with one another, then hopefully it will ensure that we never turn to violence as a way of resolving disputes, God forbid. It's a story told by a Rabbi, David Ben Sassoon. And he gets a call once on a Friday morning from a very renowned rabbi who was the head of a large yeshiva. And he said, listen, there's this teenager who's on the streets, he's lost, he's been in different therapies and programs. And I was wondering if you could reach out to him and have a conversation with him. Try to engage him. And the rabbi said, I don't know if you called the right person. I'm not really so fit for this job. And the rabbi said, please do me a favor. It's my son. Well, if it's your son, of course I'll try to help. He reaches out to this young man and he invites him over to his home for a conversation on Friday morning. He sits down, he starts talking to him. The kid is speaking, but not that engaged in the conversation. At one point, Rabbi Ben Sun looks at him and says, tell me, young man, what are you passionate about? Where is your heart? What makes you tick? The young man's eyes open wide and he says, well, I love playing the saxophone. Rabbi Sassoon says, can you play something for me? He said, well, I don't have my saxophone on me. He says, where are you staying now? He says, I'm staying about 10 minutes away in someone's house. He says, could you go get your saxophone and come back and play something for me? The boy said, sure. He goes off, comes back a half hour later with his saxophone. And he says to Rabbi Ben Sassoon, what would you like me to play for you? Well, Rabbi Ben Sassoon starts saying Jewish songs he knows. He says, no, give me a good secular popular song. He says, I don't know any of those songs. And he says, 1 minute, I was once on the train not long ago, and someone came on the subway to raise money, and he had the saxophone. He was playing the saxophone, and he was playing the song. I only remember the chorus, lean on me, lean on me. He says, do you know that song? He says, oh, I love that song. That's a great song, has a great saxophone part. Starts playing the saxophone, lean on me, and he's leaning back and giving it all his gusto, like he's on Carnegie Hall. And Rabbi Ben Sassoon is just chiming in for the chorus, lean on me. When he finishes the song, the young man comes up to the rabbi and gives him a big hug. They don't even say a word, they just hug each other. And they both understood. And the young man left the house. Half an hour before Shabbat, the rabbi, the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the large yeshiva, calls Rabbi Ben Sassoon. He said, what did you say to my son? What did you talk to him about? Did you talk to him about God? He said, no. He said, did you talk to him about Shabbat? He said, no. Did you talk to him about mitzvot? No. Did you talk to him about putting on tefillin? He said, no. He said, what did you talk to him about? He said, I spoke to him about his saxophone. And the rabbi says, I don't know what you did, but a half of an hour ago, the doorbell rang. My wife was in the kitchen. I went to open the door. And when I opened the door, my son was standing at the door. My son looked at me and said, Abba, can I come home for Shabbat? He says, my son has not been home for Shabbat in 3 years. I don't know what you said to him, but thank you from the bottom of my heart. The most important part of a conversation is connecting with the person. And when you connect with somebody and you show them that you care about them and that you're listening to them, then